What I also do to keep myself educated with accessibility is I go to DQ, the Paciello group, those really big agencies who audit websites, and they usually have blogs where I read. So that's helpful, but nothing beats the WCAG though. Okay, so but the problem with reading blogs is that sometimes people misunderstand WCAG rules, and then they write a blog about it. And since the blog post about it is very accessible and it's easier to understand than the WCAG, then people have wrong ideas about how to fix an issue. So what I would suggest is if you read a blog about accessibility or about the WCAG rule, always check with the WCAG rule. And if something is not adding up, what you can do is PM the author of the blog post and be like, hey, okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so now I am on the WCAG page. Okay, let's get started then. So the WCAG 2.2 is currently a draft, okay? And people are very hesitant to start implementing it. And I understand because it can change in any minute. Back in February, when the WCAG came out with the enhanced outline thing, nobody that I know that was like a freelancer or an agency, they're like, no, we're going to wait until the WCAG 2.2 becomes a standard. We're not going to do its suggestions because it's currently a draft. Well, that time I was working for two agencies. I was a subcontractor auditing websites, like Fortune 500 websites, and they didn't know what to do. So they asked me, Stephanie, should we go ahead and implement WCAG 2.2? And I said yes. And the reason for that is if you read the success criteria and the guidelines for a draft standard, and it makes sense, and you're like, oh dear, how did I not do that before? If it makes sense and be like, okay, this is going to be really useful for users, just go ahead and do it. You don't have to wait the WCAG to become a standard in order to implement something, because accessibility is, yes, it's also about conformance and about legal stuff, because you don't want to get sued, but it's mostly about users. And if something makes sense and is accessible, even if it's not in the WCAG, and when it comes to accessibility, a lot of things are not in the WCAG, okay? The WCAG is mostly like a guidance, and the WCAG itself says we're not forcing anybody to do it. We don't make laws, we're just guiding people. So I think WCAG 2.2 makes a lot of sense, and personally, I will be implementing it to all my personal projects that I work at. So WCAG 2.2 came out with a lot of success criteria, and they're mainly for people with cognitive disabilities. Cognitive disabilities are disabilities such as Down syndrome, dementia, traumatic brain injury, and autism. These are things that, that can make your cognitive function not function at its best, okay? The same is if you're like waking up and you're very sleepy and you have to do something on your phone, or you're very, very tired, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're trying to do something on the internet. If you implement these guidelines, they're also going to help users, okay? If you're also very drunk, like I'm sure I have bought purchases when I was drunk, and I know people who have as well. Is it smart? No, but it's what we do. So that's why accessibility is so awesome, because you do it to help disabled people, but at the same time it benefits everybody. So let's start with the first accessible authentication. And accessible authentication is about mainly marking up your logins or allowing multiple ways for people to log in. So let me show you an example. I have here a login form, okay? And what I did was I marked it sort of correctly. Let me increase the zoom. Okay, so it's an input and type password, input type email, and then we have a submit button. So in order to conform to this success criterion, which is accessible authentication, let me click on it. Okay, so to be coded in a way that the person doesn't have to remember their password in order to access the website. And the way that's going to do is you need to mark it up so that you can allow browsers to remember the user's password. When you log in somewhere and then you have a pop-up in the corner that says, do you want Firefox to remember your password? So you need to make it as easy as possible for the browser to remember the user's password. And in order to do that, first of all, you have to mark up your login form correctly. And to do that, you need to use, for example, input type password, name password. I think the name is like one of the biggest. If you don't want to use the, what was it? I think I forgot. Was it the autocomplete? Yeah, autocomplete attribute. If you can't use the autocomplete attribute for some reason, make sure you use the name. The name is And the way browsers do is they look at the login form and they're like, okay, so I want to help this user fill in the login form. How can I do that? And then they look for the autocomplete attribute. And the autocomplete attribute has a set of values that hint to the browser what values are expected inside of this login form. And they need to be the correct name. So for example, if you have if you have a date picker for a person's birthday, instead of writing autocomplete birthday, you have to write the day, okay? You can find all of the autocomplete values in MDN, so make sure that these are correct. So right now in our email example, if I remove the email and if I remove the name email, or actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Foxes, and I'm going to type it here. So I am clicking the email, but I get no no suggestions, okay? And that's bad. This violates the success criterion accessible authentication because I am forced to remember what my email was. And even, for example, I have many emails, so sometimes I forget which email I actually used to log into that website. And the reason is because the name is Foxes, not password. And while browsers look for the autocomplete attribute, they're also trying to guess what kind of input is expected via the name attribute. So if I change this from name to email and I click on it, I get a bunch of suggestions. So this is good. This is very good. However, I also get like SSS. This is probably like leftovers from me testing websites, which is not ideal, okay? But it's a step in the right direction. However, if I add the autocomplete attribute and I write email and then I test it again, see, I only get emails as suggestions. And this is like a step forward into complying to this success criterion. Another thing you can use is email links. So sometimes websites don't require to log in via email and password, but you just enter your email and then they send you a link where if you click that link, you get authorized immediately. So this one also helps with complying with the success criterion. Just anything you can do in order not to force the user to memorize email and password when logging in is going to help you. But the most important thing, I think, is making sure you mark up your form. So read up on form validation, read up on form semantics. It's very important to mark them up correctly. Also, if some website or like government, for example, if you work for the government, they give you these USB sticks that you can put in your laptop to get authorized. That's also very good. This is also complies in the same success criterion. For example, if you have like a bank, maybe the bank will send you a USB stick. It just depends on the company and what they stand for. So that's what it is in a nutshell for this success criterion. Okay. So the next success criterion we're going to is dragging. Okay, let's look at dragging. This is such a funny name. Anyways, I'm laughing because this is actually, I think that's kind of it is redundant because we have WCAG no pointer. There is a WCAG no 2-pointer value success criterion pointers. I think it was somewhere here. Okay, there was another WCAG rule about pointing. So when you press something on your phone with one finger, that's a single pointer, okay? Because your action is only with one pointer, like your finger. But if you have to drag, that means you have to take your finger from one place to the other. And that's multiple pointer gestures or something. I forgot the term for that. And dragging is, let me show you actually an example so you can see. I can show you my Skillshare account because this is a very classic example. Here I have my AMP course in Skillshare, okay? And the way that these lectures are organized is I can drag and drop and I can organize my class. So for example, here I want the users first to go through the introduction lecture, then they want what is accelerated mobile pages and so on until they go into the end of the course, which is thank you and keep in touch, where I invite people to sign up for my newsletter, okay? So if I want, for example, thank you and keep in touch to be on top of do not use Bootstrap with AMP, I have to drag it. This is very inaccessible and this is in violation of the dragging success criterion. Why? Because This requires a multiple pointer. It requires me to click a button with my mouse, and then while I have clicked the button, I need to drag it. So that's multiple pointers, okay? The way to fix that is to have a button here with the arrow up, where I click it, this goes up, and this one goes down with just one button. And why is that? Because right now I can only rearrange them with my mouse. If I'm using a keyboard, I cannot rearrange my lectures. So this is an example of how it directly violates the success criterion, dragging. Always make sure if you are making an interface that the user has to do X with a mouse, they can do the same thing with a keyboard. If there was a button here with the up arrow, I can navigate with the keyboard to the up arrow, press enter, and then have the lecture go up. Let me show you an example of how that is done correctly. Okay. This is an example of a correct implementation of the success criteria. Because we have drag and drop videos here to upload, we can either drag and drop them, or we can click select files, and then via the keyboard, we can select the file that we need to add. Okay, so this is a correct way to do it. So that's dragging in a nutshell. And then we have findable help. Findable help is very straightforward. What you have to do is basically allow the users an easy way to access help. How many times have you filled out a form and then you press submit and the form doesn't want to submit, and there is no other way to contact the company, or there is no chat? You have to do it yourself. How many times has that happened? It has happened a lot of times to me, that's for sure. And especially if you're disabled, if you have cognitive disabilities, it can be very difficult. And not just that, I mean, especially government forms, have you filled out those? Financial aid, that's terrible to fill in. I mean, you have to wait and think about it for such a long time, and there's nobody to ask for help. That's why findable help is also level A, which is amazing. Let me show you an example of so I'm going to open this website now. I want to, if anybody has any vestibular disorders, this website has a lot of movement, so just a trigger warning here. This is one of the most inaccessible websites I have ever seen. This website is terrible. Look at the movement. Look, every time you go, every time you scroll, you have movement here at the bottom, you have on the top, you have things popping up, and you can't disable them. Look, you have text. Anyways, it's bad. But okay, but let's say that I want to buy this green goo, okay? And for example, I need help. For example, I want to ask, okay, is this green goo going to help my hair grow? Something like that. Now, even though there is a chat, it doesn't say which times that they're going to be. It doesn't say which times the chat is going to be open, and it doesn't say like, okay, chat is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. So this is one of also the things that you have to keep in mind for findable help. You need to say when are people going to be able to help you. Okay, but if you ignore the chat for a minute, there is no there is a contact us. Okay, well that wasn't there yesterday when I checked it, but okay, so there is a contact us, which is really good, even though it is a little bit hard to find because it's all the way to the bottom and it's in the same. Okay, well there is a contact us. However, these links, they don't look like links, and if you've been in the accessibility sphere for a while, you know that in order for links to look like links, they have to be underlined, and they need to have like a bluish color as well to distinguish them. So even though there is a contact us, it violates the findable help criteria, and it also violates the distinguished links criteria. I forgot off the top of my head. So yeah, that doesn't really help. Let me show you one example, but this website is really bad. If anybody wants to look at a really bad accessible website, open this one. Okay, now let me show you the Deque website. They have a prominent contact us on the page, and it's repeated in the same place. So even if I go to their blog, okay, they don't have it on their blog. Oh wait, that's digital accessibility legal update. Let me see. Okay, it's in most of these pages. Okay, so they don't have it like 100%, because when I clicked on here, they don't have it. Okay, they have it here. So they should have it in every, especially here, like when you have to register and you need help, they don't have the button here. So they are not 100% compliant, but they have a good idea because they also have in the footer, okay, except cookies. On the footer, they also have a phone number. So make sure that you have a contact us in the header or in the footer or both, and they have to be at the same place all the time. That's very important. No matter what page you go, the contact us button has to be in the same place, okay? And the contact us can also be like a part of your navigation. That's also fine. It just has to be persistent. So that's a findable help in a nutshell. Can everybody hear me and see me okay? I'm just checking. So just so. So the next one is focus appearance. No, it is, okay, fixed reference points is for electronic publications, also known as EPUB. If anybody here has a Kindle, electronic books, digital books, ebooks, whatever, they're very popular. I personally prefer paperbacks, but digital is very, very accessible for people with disabilities. There's so little books translated to Braille. So blind people, especially, they rely on digital books and they have their screen reader read it for them or a text reader. So, but if you have an EPUB, you need to add a table of contents. Why? Because if you zoom in, for example, let's say that you are on a Zoom call with your teacher, and then the teacher says, open to page 216, and then everybody opens on the page 216. Well, if you have visual impairment and you have zoomed in, the words, when you zoom in, the words become bigger and they take more space. So page 216 might not be the page you're supposed to be because you've zoomed. That's why there needs to be table of contents. And when the teacher says, go to page 216, you would go to the table of contents, click the page, and then you will be redirected to the correct place, okay? Because the table of contents reference the page number, even if it is zoomed in. So that's why EPUB. This is for EPUBs. I'm not sure if it's also for PDFs. If anybody has any information in this resource about PDFs, let me know. I'm going to do more research on that. So the next one is focus appearance. Okay. So focus appearance, minimum and maximum. I want to make a note about this. Focus appearance is it's about the outline, okay? The outline is, I am pressing tab right now, and let me zoom in. See, the selected menu items are highlighted or focused. This is what the focus appearance is. See, if I focus the different links, they also get highlighted. So with focus appearance, they have split this rule into two. So one of them is AA, and I think the other one is enhanced, that's AAA, okay. It's a very long rule with a lot of, there's so much geometry, mathematics, and thinking and philosophy going on in this rule. I cannot explain. Look at that. They tell you if it's okay to use a shadow. They tell you if you have weird geometrical shapes, how to do it. And also WCAG, it's 2020. You have a new WCAG rule. Why are all your examples so old and so terrible looking? Anyways, so how I fix that is I just follow the AAA rule, okay? Because the AAA rule is very, very, very quick, to the point, and even if you fail the AAA rule, you're still going to comply to the AA rule, which is focus appearance minimum, okay? This is AA. Okay, remember, level A, you absolutely have to do it. Your website is the most inaccessible thing to ever exist. Level AA is also, you absolutely have to do it. There is no exception. AAA is try to do it if you can, but if you can't, that's okay. But if you don't try to implement AAA, then that's bad too, okay? That's the ruling for the levels. So what I try to do is I just try to implement level AAA. Even if I fail to it, the worst thing that can happen is it can just revert back to AA, which will still make my website conforming. And to do that is very easy. Like I can show you my website where I implemented the focus. Let me open it. Oh no, that's not my website. Okay, so if I tap through my website, you see my focus is very thick. It's 4 pixels. It doesn't have to be 4 pixels. It can only be 2 pixels in order to conform to the AAA focus appearance enhanced. And the contrast color very much contrasts from the background. So it is AAA. in contrast color. I don't remember the formula. I'm not very good at mathematics, but it's basically you just you take the background color and the foreground color. The foreground color is going to be this color here of the focus, and you put it into a focused contrast tester, contrast tester or something, and then it tells you if it's double A or triple A. So this color has to be triple A contrast to the background, and it's really good. And see, I changed it here for this button, and I just do triple A and that's it. It's very easy for me. You can also use shadows. You can use geometrical patterns, but that's what I do, and I haven't had any problems with that. Okay, so here I have an accessibility for the contrast. I have an example for the contrast rule. So I'm going to take a break just to have some water because my throat is like super dry. Right, so here I make right, see, here's an example. I think I can pull up the CSS. Very easy, just outline 2 pixels solid dark green. It contrasts great, and it's very, very visible. Okay, there's no problems with it. Okay, everything's okay. So with the AAA, here's another thing. With the AAA, you are not allowed to have overlapping. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this button overlap the link. So I have focused the button, I have focused the link, but as you can see, the button is overlapping the link. If you want to follow the AAA focus appearance, you're not allowed to have elements overlapping. See, unobscured, no part of the focus indicator is hidden by author-created content. Okay, so this is going to violate the criterion. But see, I did not notice this when I loaded the page, and I was trying to follow AAA, and I was still conforming to AA. So that's one trick I use. But yeah, this will be in violation of the success criterion. So just make sure that nothing is overlapping on those elements. Okay. And the next thing is hidden controls. Hidden controls is interesting. So with hidden controls, you have to make sure that controls needed to complete an action are visible, or if they're not visible, they need to be persistent. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. For example, how many times have you you filled in a form and the button was gray, and you made a mistake on the form and the button was still gray, and the button was still disabled until you fill in the form correctly, but because nobody's telling you what mistake you made, the button keeps being gray and you keep pressing it, but it's disabled. So I think in this criteria, it's actually okay, but I'm just giving you an example of hidden controls and how they can really mess up with accessibility, okay? So I have an example here. That's some really bad JavaScript I wrote because I was in a hurry. It works, but don't copy it, don't use it in production. Okay, so this example, let's pretend that this is an email client. And if I click in this box, I'm going to start writing an email. This is the send email button. So I'm clicking here and the button disappears. Now you might be thinking, well, Stephanie, is this going to be in violation of the success criterion? No, and let me show you why. I'm typing, and now I have finished writing my email, and now I remember where the button was. So I'm going to hover over, and the button is going to appear. So even though the button is hidden when I type my email, it's in the same position when I hover over it. So that makes it accessible. Another thing is I'm typing my email, and I'm trying to find the send button. So I'm only going to use the tab key, and the send email is there. So I can select it with the tab key. So it is accessible via the keyboard, and it's accessible on hovering, it's on the same place, okay? However, let us violate this success criterion. I'm going to open this style. So I'm going to focus the text area, going to write my letter. Then I'm going to say, okay, the letter is done. I want to send it now. Where was the send button? Oh, it was in the left corner of the text area. So I am hovering over, but the email is not there. It's actually moved on the right. This is in violation of the success criterion. Let me see where it was. Focus appearance, no. Okay, hidden controls. And that's because even though it was visually hidden, it was also hidden, it was also moved when my hover was on it, was of it, okay? So even though it was hidden, it was, before that, it was persistently, it was on the same spot, which means persistent presence or something like that. So this is in a nutshell. Make sure that all of your, the best case scenario is this send email never to be hidden, but sometimes you have to hide them. Make sure they're in the same position and they can always be accessed with the keyboard, unless it's some sort of an essential thing. For example, if you make a game about remember the buttons, like if there's an online game that you have to click a button and you have to memorize what position was in when you hover over the mouse, if you guess the correct position, then you get a prize, something like that. So just make sure that the controls are always shown, or if they're not shown, make sure that when the user hovers over, interacts with them, they're still at the correct place. Okay, that's pretty much it. And with this webinar, I'm trying to give you like life examples of the success guidelines, and I'm also trying to give it to you in a nutshell. But you should go ahead and read it yourself, of course, because there are things I have probably gotten wrong, and I have corrected myself many times with the WCAG because it's such a difficult document to read and get through, and the examples are just terrible. Another thing is pointer spacer. Oh, this is another example of, this is the other guideline. Let me go back. New features in Nanga. Pointer target spacing. So there's a WCAG guideline about target size. I am terrible at remembering the names of those guidelines. I know where they are. I know what they are. I just can't remember the names. So there's a target size AAA that says every pointer and any size of the target must be 44 by 44 pixels. Okay, very simple, unless it's created by the user agent, and user agent is a code word for browser. I don't know why they just call it browser, but whatever. Pointer target spacing is saying, okay, you don't need to actually have 44 by 44 if there's a sufficient spacing between them. So in this example, we have these buttons that are all 44 by 44, but they have no spacing between them. So that's why they have to be 44 by 44. These buttons are 38 by 38, but they don't violate the success criteria because they have six pixels between them. So here you have to calculate 38 by 38. This is a square plus 6 pixels of the size makes 44. Again, geometry, math, so complicated. So what I do is I just make sure all my buttons are 44 by 44, okay? It's easy, very accessible, very good with people using phones, and you don't have to make complicated math problems. So these two criterions, the target size criteria and this criteria, is only if you modify the button with CSS. These buttons are generated by the user agent. That means I have written no CSS to change these buttons. That means that they don't have to comply to the success criteria, pointer, target, spacing. Okay, so even though they're very small, I have not modified their CSS, so they're fine. However, the minute I modify the CSS, then I have to start worrying about 44 by 44. So let's say that I do modify the CSS and say, for example, let's see, background green and color. Right. Now these are way too small. So what I'm going to do is just add width 44 and height 44. There we go. And it's about the target. So what that means is, I think what I did before was what happened at my job is I wanted to make the buttons 44 by 44, but the designers said, no, we don't want to do it. It's going to be ugly. So what I did is I added a div inside the button, and I just made it. So I made the div the pointer of clicking. I forgot about the code, but so it doesn't have to be the button itself, just the target size. Okay, so even if you have a div inside the button, it's also going to work. But that's a bit complicated. If you can do it with just a button, that's fine too. So these ones are 44 by 44, so they comply with AAA, AA, very good buttons. And then, of course, they can be smaller if there's a sufficient spacing between them. And redundant entry. Redundant entry is don't request the same information twice unless it is essential. So if your whole website is built on, I don't know how that will work. Maybe for authentication. Yeah, for authentication, if you need to doubly authenticate someone, then that's sort of okay. But they have an example here. If you have to double authenticate them, just show them their password or the government ID and say, is this the correct one? And they can press either yes or no, okay? So if you ask, this is a good example for like online shopping, okay? So with online shopping, they usually ask you for your shipping address and your billing address. When you enter your shipping address, there's usually a button that says, is your shipping address the same as your billing address? And you can either say yes or no. This is in conformance of the success criteria because you can just press a button instead of adding your shipping address all over again for the billing address. If something happens, if you have like a 3-step form, for example, if a form has 3 steps, step 1, enter your personal information, step 2, enter your credit card. If you go back, the form, the information in the first form has to be populated. It cannot be blank. Otherwise, you'll be requesting the same information twice. So, and this is good because the point of the success criteria is again with people with cognitive disabilities, or if you have hurt your arm and it's difficult for you to type. If you have arthritis in your hands, it's difficult for you to type. It's much better that you just have a button that you click, yes, this is the information I entered and it's correct. Okay, and I think that's all the success criterion.